on a bed, and all of a sudden it was as if what I was looking at was like a rubber sheet. All of reality was like a rubber sheet, and somebody came and pinched that sheet and pulled it back so that time and space sort of vortexed, and a demon appeared out of this vortex.
Demon appears in this shack.
Yeah, like instead of seeing 4 people, all of a sudden now I'm looking at a demon.
Welcome back to the Encounter Show. I'm here with John. Dale's on the camera. And John Clancy is a global citizen who is a pastor. He's got some amazing God stories. And the whole point of the Encounter Show is to build your faith, to build our faith, just encourage each other of what Jesus is doing now in our lives, not just in the Bible, but today in 2023. And John has some amazing stories of how God has just intervened in your life, whether deserved or undeserved. His favor is there. And do you want to just say hello? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And
yeah, I'm John Clancy, and I'm American. My accent, I've been told, is a bit of a mishmash at this point.
Transatlantic.
Yeah. I've been living in Scotland for about 16 years.
Wow.
Spent a couple years down in England. We're part of a network of churches called Skylark, also part of Bethel Leaders Network, and this network across the north called Orcas, which we founded. I was living in Orkney for 16 years, and I've got 6 kids.
Wow.
And a Canadian wife who's awesome, named Rachel.
Oh, great. Wow.
That's the bullet point version.
So, North American family, Canadian American, 6 kids who are Scottish American Canadians.
Well, they speak Scottish when they're with their pals, but one of them currently has American citizenship, and the others are all eligible to be Americans, Brits, and Canadians if they want. So,
John's one of those guys that whenever I speak to him, he tells me a different story with a different country. I'm like, India or Ukraine. I'm like, how do you get around all these places? But I think for me, one of the best stories you've ever told me was how you became a Christian. Your journey into finding Jesus isn't an everyday story, and it is one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the show, especially for some of the young guys that I know who maybe they're pursuing lifestyles outside of Jesus, and I know that your story would encourage people to come running back to him or running to find him. So do you want to just launch into like your life before God and what happened there?
Yeah, it is a crazy story. I mean, sometimes when I'm thinking about this stuff, it seems like so far ago, not just in terms of time, but my life was a completely different person. It almost feels like it was somebody else's story, you know?
Yeah.
It's really weird that way. But I mean, essentially, you could sum it up by saying I was a drug smuggler who ended up getting saved out of this radical experience. But I suppose you could kind of go back further than that and say that we came from a broken home. My parents got divorced when I was 13. My dad was a pretty successful business person, so up until about the age of 11, we had led a pretty rich life, I guess. You know, boats, and we had a summer house and a winter house.
That's a rich life, eh, Dale?
Yeah, it was. You know, it was idyllic in some respects, but my dad was an alcoholic. This was in the 90s or the late 80s, and he ended up getting into cocaine. There was marriage problems, and when my parents got divorced, he basically went off the rails with crack cocaine. Wow. And his life really took a downhill turn fast. Any semblance of money that we had sort of all either went to lawyers, people who were embezzling from my dad's business at the time, and drugs.
Cool.
And so it all basically went up in smoke in a very short space of time, just a matter of a couple of years. And things got pretty bad. So when my dad was doing drugs, I wanted to be hanging out with him and hanging out with his pals, even though his life was in complete chaos. And we started doing drugs together fairly quickly.
And with your dad?
With my dad,
Wow.
yeah. So once I had his approval and also his connections, I was able to get drugs from his pals and sell them to my pals and realize, hey, I can not only have all of my drugs free, but I can have a little extra money. So I started doing that at 13, and that just sort of...
A little entrepreneur at 13.
That's right, yeah. That just continued until I was about 18 when I graduated school. By then I was into cocaine myself.
Wow. In high school?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then after high school, I was selling cocaine, selling it to adults, and I was making a ton of money at that stage. But my life was also a complete disaster. I mean, I had never been more petrified. Well, I can't say that. There was a time later on that I'll mention that I was probably more petrified, but I had like paranoid delusions, from all the cocaine and whatnot. And so yeah, it wasn't a pleasant situation. Then I got in trouble with the law, so I joined the Navy to try to get out of it.
Nice.
And it didn't really help that much.
Didn't work.
I still did loads of drugs while I was in the Navy, and found that I could, with a military ID, it was even easier to smuggle drugs across the border.
Wow.
So I was getting drugs in Vancouver, smuggling them across the border, and making loads of money. So there was, once I got out of the Navy, I still had an ID that I could use. There was my last month of drug smuggling, I made like 50 grand.
Whoa.
There was a time where I was sitting in my room with all of this cash, counting it, and looking over at my single pane windows and thinking, that's just a pane of glass away from somebody, breaking in, maybe not only stealing this, but killing me as well.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, I had always thought, man, if I can just get that amount of money, I can sort of rest easy. But now all of a sudden I'm sitting on this pile of cash and I'm thinking, oh, I'm not safe. What is it actually going to take for me to be safe or to be at rest? I don't have to worry about money. And thinking, I need more security. I probably need a house with a wall. In order to afford that, I probably need to be living in like Mexico or something, where I can hire security guards.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need millions in order to make this all work. I'm like, I need millions.
No.
Yeah, so I know now, obviously, no matter how much I had, that just would have been there even more and more. But I started then thinking, how can I get millions? And so I was connected into this group of people who were the same ones I made 50 grand with.
Right.
And I had a couple of different pathways to try to make $1 million by the end of the year.
Wow.
And it was probably either that was going to work or I was going to end up dead or in jail.
Wow.
Those are the most likely
But
options.
you wanted money so bad, you would risk all of that.
Well, yeah, that was the only sort of career path or life path I saw at the time.
Wow.
I didn't see any other.
This is why we need God's plan, isn't it? Yeah. His ways are higher than ours. Yeah.
That is all I saw at present. There's just one way, and that's forward. And this is the track that I'm on, so I gotta just keep on going. So that's what I was doing. This group that I fell in with, all of a sudden, they start bringing me into like an initiation.
These are drug dealers.
These are drug dealers, and this initiation happened over 3 months.
Wow.
And it was sort of a collection of trials and tests that was designed to help them see if I was suitable to be on the inner circle of their group.
Wow.
And at the time, I thought that they were the Illuminati. That's what I knew this group as. There was no name.
Because they were so secretive or just weird?
I had read a book about the Illuminati ages ago. And over this 3 months, there were occasions where there was all sorts of supernatural things. Like they were able to read my mind on certain occasions. Wow. There was whole evenings where certain people among them were able to know whatever I was thinking. So I'd have a thought and they'd be responding to my thoughts without me actually verbalizing it.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And like there was times where if I told you some of the stories about some of the stuff that was happening, I mean, you would think I was crazy.
Or that's demonic and there's
something
else going on.
Or that's demonic. Yeah. I mean, there was lots of times of telepathy where people were able to communicate to me and I was able to communicate to them.
Wow.
Like mind control, group control, all sorts of like really bizarre things over 3 months. Enough for me to see that these guys had something that was supernatural, that was far more than what I understood existed in the world. And all I knew was I wanted this. I wanted in with this.
Yeah.
So over
Must
this,
have been really intriguing as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
yep. Because up to this point, I would have considered myself a Christian.
Wow. Okay.
If you would have asked me, I would have said, "Yeah, I'm a Christian." You know, you would have said, "Does not have any, conflict with your profession of drug smuggling?" I would be like, no, like, I don't deal heroin. I don't deal crack.
Yeah.
And these
I'm
are
not doing it to 7-year-olds.
yeah,
okay.
no, like
I'm the good
I'm
guy.
a moral. I'm a fairly moral
Drug
guy.
dealer.
Yeah, I'm a moral guy. Who just happens to be a drug dealer. But I deal recreational drugs and mostly ecstasy. Yeah, there was the occasional foray into crystal meth, but after I realized what that does to people, I put that aside. It's the same as coke. I ended up putting that aside, and I would only sort of deal in LSD, ecstasy, kilos of ecstasy, and
Sounds like you convinced yourself you were doing a
yeah.
community service.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I'm part of the neighborhood here. Yeah.
I had a sliding moral scale, as most people
Sure.
do, so I was somewhere in there, and I just thought God was far off. He's probably not. He's the guy who you meet when you die.
Right.
You die, you're going to enter, you're going to see St. Peter, and St. Peter's going to say, "Hey, why should I let you in?" And if you get the code word right, which is Jesus died for my sins and I believe that with all my heart, then he'll say, "Okay, come on in. You can meet God now."
Yeah.
And that was it. It's like, I know the code word, so I'm good. So I'm chasing this group. I'm pursuing this group, trying to get in. And finally, after 3 months, and it seemed like nothing I could do would ever make them happy. And there were times where they would threaten my life. And I'd seen enough about these guys to know that I was completely subject to their control. This is what I thought. That there's no place I can hide from them. They know stuff. All I can do is move forward. Well, this final evening, after a few months of this, I was up in this little kind of shack up on top of a mountain in Washington State. These 4 people had taken me up there, and this was to be my final initiation. And I didn't know this. And we had all done some drugs, and the 4 of them lay down on a bed, and all of a sudden it was as if what I was looking at was like a rubber sheet. All of reality was like a rubber sheet, and somebody came and pinched that sheet and pulled it back so that time and space sort of vortexed, and a demon appeared out of this vortex.
A demon appears in this shack.
Like instead of seeing 4 people, all of a sudden now I'm looking at a demon, and the demon says, "Hey, you're my son, and it's time for you to inherit what's rightfully yours.
Oh, wow.
All you need to do is make an agreement with me, and you can step into what's yours." And I'm freaking out, obviously anybody would, but all of a sudden I see behind the curtain of this thing that I had been pursuing, and it's a demon. And I had been,
So the demon is running the whole drugs operation.
The demon. Looking back on it, what I believe about the Illuminati, it means illuminated ones, and they're illuminated to the fact that there's a God and a devil, and they've chosen the devil.
Yeah.
So they're just people who have actually exchanged, their life for empty promises of the devil to get whatever they want.
What a lie to say that you're my son, and you will have my inheritance. Just like Jesus, isn't it, in the desert? I will give you all of this, half my kingdom, whatever it is. Yeah,
he's the father of lies. And if you looked at the lives of these people, they had messed up lives. I mean, these were not idyllic lives. So if I would, even looking at it and thinking, would I want what they have? Would I want those lives of people? Absolutely not, under no circumstances. But at the time, I was just feared for my life.
That must have been scary.
At the time, I'm just thinking, I just want to get out of here. What can I knew that I couldn't say yes right away. There was no part of me that thought, should I say yes to this?
Wow.
It's just like, can I get out of here alive? Because I can't say as soon as you know it's a devil, it's like, no way.
What did it look like? Was it like a
had like a frog head, a frog-shaped head with like clear skin, and in the sense it was a wide mouth, sort of eyes on the side, horns, and as soon as he came in the room, it was like the sound of a furnace in the room, and it felt like the temperature raised, and it was the most oppressive thing, just being in the presence of this thing. And so he was in that form for a couple of minutes, and then
Wow.
he sort of dissipated into the 4 people who were there.
Wow.
And they each took on like a different sort of physical characteristic, like scales and stuff. So I gotta say, I said that I took drugs during this, and I took LSD at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone could have asked, hey, how do you know this wasn't
A trip.
How do you know this wasn't some hallucination? And what I will say is I had been taking LSD. The first drug I did with my dad at 13 was LSD.
Wow.
And I had been doing LSD, essentially since that time. This happened when I was 23. So for 10 years, I had loads of experience. And never once did I have an experience with LSD that you look back after and go, was that real or was that not real?
Yeah, yeah.
In hindsight, you're always able to know. And even in the moment when your mind is, going all over the place, you can usually differentiate between reality and illusion. But not only can I look back on that and know that it was real and have a whole years of experience, but these people, I would talk to them afterwards, and I never had to say to them, hey, did you experience that thing that I was experiencing? Mm-hmm. We just had very casual conversations. When first time I saw them, time I saw them afterwards, they said, hey, why didn't you do it?
Wow.
Why didn't you go for, like they had the exact same experience that I had.
Yeah.
So it dissipates into these 4 people, and then they spend the rest of the evening trying to convince me to do this. And they kept the rewards over the night. If I said yes, we're getting better and better to like Swiss chalets and helicopters and things like that.
Wow.
And the threats, if I said no, we're getting worse and worse. Wow. So it went from, being impoverished and living in some sort of trailer park to actually we're going to take out power tools and go to town on you tonight until you're dead if you say no.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, that's so evil.
Oh, man, it was
so
bad.
Evil.
It was bad.
And did at any point, did you consider these guys as your friends, ever? Or
at this point, I no longer saw them as my friends.
No.
I just saw them as demonic entities. Mm-hmm. At this point, I'm just dealing with four demonic entities. And, so I actually laid down on the ground to die. I had actually resigned at one point in this evening and just said, you know what? You're going to have to kill me. I just laid down on the ground as a symbol of like I can't do this anymore.
Wow.
Shortly after that, when they didn't kill me and they sort of made up some sort of lie, I began to suspect that maybe I could leave. So I said, hey, can I go? And they were like, we're not going to stop you, whatever. So tentatively, I got in my car, started driving down this mountain and thinking, any minute a truck is going to come out of nowhere and ram me, and I'm going to go off the side of the road, and I'm going to, they're going to read about me in the newspaper tomorrow.
Wow.
That's going to be it. And I remember,
it's like a horror movie. You'd be breaking the speed limit, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Oh no, I was driving very carefully because I was confident that now that I was out from underneath their protection, I was going to die.
Wow.
So I'm driving down, and like I said, it was up on a mountain. It was probably 4:30 in the morning now. This had happened all night. And the sun was coming up, and as I'm driving down, there was a low-lying cloud that I was above. And as I was driving down, I was driving into this cloud. And as I drove into the cloud, I remember thinking, God is in this cloud.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember thinking, like, somehow God is in this cloud. And I had this sense, just for a moment, that everything was going to be okay.
Like a God awareness, a peace.
Yeah. Like, actually, God was watching this whole situation. And I was going to be okay. It didn't last long.
But if there was ever a moment in your life where you would become spiritually awake, it would be following something like that. It would be like...
That's right.
And you're sort of... cogs are ticking like, they're the bad guys, I need to go find the good guys.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Because all of a sudden the reality hits that these things, these spiritual things are not just far away, but they're actually realities that are very near, much more near, that I had been interacting with. And for months, I'd been getting messages from this group over the radio and like from complete strangers, and all of a sudden I'm realizing this was just demons. The demons were actually speaking to me. Demons were all around doing this.
I mean, even the whole drug thing, I don't know if you know, the Greek word pharmaceutical is where we get pharmos, which is sorcery in Greek. Yeah. So like drugs are a gateway to the occult, to the spirit world. And so like if you've been doing LSD for 10 years, you would probably be really spiritually open to the spirit world just on that alone, let alone being introduced to these guys, you know?
Yeah. Pharmakia is implied sorcery. And I spoke to somebody recently who had a Jesus encounter while high on acid. And his story was like the antithesis of mine, but with the same result. And it's true, there's a breaking down of your spiritual guard when you do it, which is not at all healthy. You know,
it's abusing your body, mind, and spirit, isn't it?
Yeah, not at all healthy. It's not a good way to encounter him. But I love that he used that. He knew where I was, and he knew that what it was going to take. He knew what it was going to take to actually shift gears with me.
So you go into this cloud, and you have this glimpse, this moment where you're like, God is real, God's here.
Yeah, so
I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, so I go home, and at this point, now I'm thinking I've made it home. At any moment, the police are going to come because I no longer have their protection. Yeah. So I go into my room and I flush all of these drugs, thousands of pounds worth of drugs.
Wow.
I couldn't flush a kilo of hash that I had, so I gave that to somebody. I still wasn't sure what to make of cannabis because I had been a sold out cannabis convert for a long time. So I was still thinking, oh, maybe that's okay. But I think it was a month or so. Yeah, it was actually the last time I smoked cannabis. I was standing on a beach, and there were people walking in 3 different directions as I was standing there, and I'd taken one hit, and I had this lighter in my hand, and a lighter with these guys symbolized power. Flame symbolized power. So I had this thing in my hand, and I was looking at it, and at that precise moment, this guy was speaking to his kid, and there was like 3 different conversations, and they were all walking in different directions, and it was like highlighted words from each conversation to make a fluent sentence to me. And the sentence was, you can come back anytime you want. And I heard this out of their words. Wow. And I looked down and I saw that lighter in my hand. I thought, I made the connection because there's this verse in James that says, if you resist the enemy and he will flee. Submit to God, resist the enemy and he will flee. And I looked down and I saw that and I thought, I need him to flee. I am never doing this again. Wow. You know what I mean? But that was later. But so at the time in my room, I'm thinking I need to cancel all my debts. One guy owed me $15,000. Another guy owed me like $5,000. I used to give drugs to people and then they would pay me back. Right. I called them all up, said, I don't want it. You can keep it. That's it. I'm done. Wow. And I wanted to be sleeping in a church. I was looking for any place I could go.
Wow. You're looking for sanctuary.
I was looking for sanctuary. That's exactly right. Wow. And so I ended up going to a church that first weekend, and they said at their service, they said, "Oh, we've got a university weekend away this weekend. Dr. Gordon Fee is going to be speaking. He was a New Testament scholar, preached on Philippians. I still remember that. I went there, and I had a nose ring." They said, "Oh, do you want to ride the bus?" I said, "Can I smoke on the bus?" They said, "No." I said, "I'll drive." I was rough around the edges. I wore my hat down. I wore this hard expression on my face, like, you talk to me, I might slap you, And those guys were so kind to me. Wow. Like, they just came up to me and was like, "Hey, man, what's your story? I bet you come here. I want to hang out with you." And I'm just like, who are these people? Yeah. But man, they loved me. They took me in. I ended up getting rid of my house and moving in with about 12 of these guys who ran this campus ministry. Wow. In their mansion. I had nothing to do with that ministry, but they said, "Yeah, you need a place where you can heal." Wow. And took me in.
So they were on some sort of like youth training type sort of.
They were campus pastors for Christian ministry to big universities called Chi Alpha Ministries. I think it was connected with the Assemblies of God at the time. Okay, yeah. So they took me in, and I started to get healed up over that time. And that year, it was like God took my hand and led me step by step into restoration.
Wow.
I didn't want to even talk about my story at first because everybody wanted to hear about the demons and stuff, and I didn't even want to talk about that.
I bet, yeah.
Plus, I didn't know who was part of this group or not.
Right.
So I was still paranoid, completely paranoid that I was going to be deceived.
Like
because
someone had infiltrated and they were going to find you.
Oh, yeah, because I thought these guys are everywhere.
Wow.
And the one major revelation that I had at the time is that you do not know where you're deceived.
Because you're in deception.
You're in deception.
Yeah.
That's the nature of deception. You do not know what you believe is true that is actually a lie. And I thought, okay, Lord, I'm completely at your mercy to help me sort out what's true and what's not. And so that year I went to 4 different churches, 4 different church services.
Every weekend?
Every week, yeah. Wow. I went to 1 on Wednesday night and 3 on Sunday, an early morning service, a late morning service, and an evening service.
Super Christian, yeah.
Not super. I wanted to just check what one was saying off the other one.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because I was too worried about being deceived. So I picked very different types of churches.
Just looking for truth.
Just looking for truth.
Wow.
And I joined, out of those 4 churches, I joined 3 home groups. And I also went to meetings with the Chi Alpha Campus Christian Fellowship. Wow. And then I would also listen to Calvary Chapel Radio, where they would just teach through the Bible chapter by chapter.
Wow.
And for a year, I was just soaking in. It was like my own homemade discipleship program.
Yeah. It's like some people, it takes a whole village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And some people, when they get saved, they do just need as much Christian input as possible. And like, it sounds like you did the right thing by hungering after that and going finding it. And And I'd recommend that to people who feel like they need that. Like any one church isn't able to actually, because I don't think any one church could give me what I needed at that time. Oh, you needed a lot of attention.
Yeah, churches don't have that infrastructure. So it actually worked really well to just go and connect myself with as many people as I could. Wow. And it was a type of Bible school in a way.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it had its ups and downs, but yeah.
We had multiple pastors looking out for you, you know, and yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where did you go from there? So you get saved, and I take it a year of going to all these different places, you would have really known the word by the end of that year. You would have started to understand God's love for you, his protection for you. Yeah. Then where did you know, I think we all arrive as Christians, we get to this place where we're like, now I'm saved. Where is God leading me? What's my calling? What happened from that stage?
Well, one kind of cool encounter I can tell you about that was pivotal in that time was when I started speaking in tongues.
Go for it, yeah.
Because I had such a history of being deceived, I said to God, I do not want anything that is not of you. And I was particularly afraid of getting something, some
other entity or demonic spirit or something.
Either getting a demonic spirit or just being led down the wrong path. And so I had a really tight filter for that. But it was a good thing in some respects, but it was also something that held me back from experiencing God, because there's too much fear there of, like, you know, I don't want anything that's not real. And I think some of the way that God has spoken to me, at least, is when there's a level of openness and quiet trust. And that hadn't matured in me very much at all. It was still a lot of fear.
Faith is so like the opposite of being cautious. It's just like unraveling yourself and just saying, I'm all in, God.
Yeah.
But if you're holding back, it's really hard to move into the supernatural gifts and things of the Spirit, because you're putting the barrier up. God's there, he's ready, and you've got to come and meet him, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah. So there was that barrier there for me with receiving the gift of tongues. Now, when I went to this one church to get baptized, they didn't even believe in any of the gifts of the Spirit, and I didn't know this.
Okay.
I was still early on in my faith, and the guy said, why do you want to be baptized? And I said, well, I've been baptized in the Spirit. And he said, how do you know you've been baptized in the Spirit? I said, well, what I can read of Scripture like lives are transformed when you get filled with the Spirit, and my life has been radically transformed. There's no way that could have happened without being filled with the Spirit.
Yeah.
I didn't know he didn't believe in being filled with the Spirit in that way, but he was like, yeah, okay, that's a good answer. Yeah, we'll baptize you. And I'm like, fantastic. He did a great job. Great guy. And so I ended up getting baptized, and I believed that I had already been baptized in the Spirit, but I didn't have any demonstrative gift. I didn't have the gift of tongues, but I wanted it. I saw these other people, and I thought, I don't really know how to pray very well, so I really want that gift. And but because I had this fear thing, it just wasn't happening.
But your hunger is what pushes you through, and it's like, I've seen so many people who have this take it or leave it with the Holy Spirit. If you could take or leave your healing, guess what? You probably won't get healed. If you could take or leave the gift of tongues, you probably won't get it. You do have to have a hunger in there somewhere.
Yeah.
You can't just walk around with your hands in your pockets spiritually thinking God will just show up.
Because the scripture says desire and pursue spiritual gifts.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there was a bit of that pursuit for me, and it's like, I want that. I want this thing of people can pray in a way that the scripture says you're being edified when you pray in the Spirit. I want to edify myself that way.
Yeah.
That sometimes when my mind's all messed up, I can just do that. So I'd been praying and saying, Lord, give me that. And people were praying for me, laying hands, and none of it was happening. And there was this one day I went for a drive to pray, and I went driving down the coast, this beautiful spot, and I parked up, and I was exhausted at this stage in my life. It was stressful trying to root out lies from truth in my life. And I ended up sort of falling asleep as I was praying, like so many of us do. And I was in that place just in between being asleep and awake. And I'm still praying, and I'm hearing these words come out of my mouth, but I'm in my sleepiness, I'm hearing these words, and I'm like, what is that? And then I realized that was me. I was still praying, but I was praying.
Wow.
I was praying in another
tongues.
language.
Wow.
I was praying in tongues.
Yeah.
But I was I was at that point where my logical mind had gone to sleep, but I was just awake enough to actually hear my spirit, the Holy Spirit within me interceding for me in this language without my logical mind and my fear getting in the way.
Yeah.
And I realized I had probably received that gift like so many times previously, but just never had the faith to actually enact it because my logic was getting in the way.
Yeah.
And man, I had the deepest peace and joy as I came to, and I sort of woke up, and I realized, wow, you're in me and you've given me this gift. And there was just this massive sense of peace. And I drove back just praising him at the top of my lungs.
Good.
You know what I mean?
So good. Yeah.
So that was a cool bit. And then when I went back, I didn't know what to do with my life. A lot of these guys, the American church felt weird to me.
Right.
There was a lot of games and which is absolutely fine. Like games and fun is great, but it seemed like it was all games and all fun. And I had just had this experience.
Yeah.
Where
you
I'm
wanted
like,
a God encounter.
And I'm like, the devil's real and he's out there, and like, all we're doing is playing board games, you know? And it was like, and that's a really harsh characterization, but I was not an easy guy to live with at that stage because...
Oh, your mind must have been in a whole other place. You're like, the devil's real. Why are we messing about?
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah. So I had said this to one of the campus pastors there, and he said, do you know what you should do? You should do a YWAM DTS.
Nice.
And go to a different culture, because this is what Christianity looks like right here in this place at this time, on this uni with these people. And it's got its good, the bad, and the uglies, but other places have different good, bad, and uglies. Yeah. And the only way you can experience that is if you pick up and go to a different culture. Yeah. So I... Do
you want to just explain Youth with a Mission, YWAM? They've got like training schools all over the world. Mostly sort of young adults go there, don't they? And just sort of...
Yeah.
It'd be like you take a year out or maybe more, do some sort of discipleship training, evangelism, a lot of prayer. They're just really good guys. They're all over the globe. Lots of people will say, oh yeah, I started my walk with God really through YWAM, or
Yeah, they have discipleship schools, training schools, which is the first sort of school, and then from there you can get into all sorts of things. I did later a school of biblical studies with them as well, which was just a brilliant school. But I prayed about where to go and felt I would go to Ukraine.
Wow.
I wanted to go to some place that was not, super, not super rich place, but also not a place where I was likely to get killed or anything, which is probably not true today.
Yeah. The opposite's true today.
Yeah. But so it was a fabulous experience, a really, really good experience. My outreach was to Siberia, and I just watched my Christian family actually help support that endeavor as well. We had loads of people who supported me and just loved on me through that whole journey.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. So Ukraine, how long were you in Ukraine?
I was there for a year in total.
Wow. God can do a lot in a year, though. I mean, is there any sort of stories that might build people's faith from that time in Ukraine that you can think of?
Yeah, there was one day in particular that was really cool. The school, all the base leaders had gone away somewhere, and they had left 2 students in charge, and I was one of those students. And so they gave me the finances for the week, and we had this speaker, and they said, you need to make sure that on Sunday afternoon, you need to make sure that you come and you pay for the speaker's taxi and you get him to the airport. Here's the money to do that. And so I had the money in my pocket, and I was probably feeling pretty proud. I'm in charge now. Young guy wrestling with his pride, and I'm on my way to church. I thought I'm probably just gonna have time to get to church, and but I didn't. I usually went with a Ukrainian guy, and I didn't really know the way to this church very well.
Right.
And I'm thinking, but I felt I was to go to that church, and then on the way, I saw this beggar sitting on a bridge. And I felt like God say, I want you to give all the money to this beggar.
Right, okay.
I'm thinking, this isn't even my money. Like, what am I going to do if I give all this money to this beggar? And I'm like, oh, jeez, Lord. So I keep walking, and then I sort of stop, and I'm wrestling with this. I'm like, God, are you sure? And is that really you? That thing where you're wrestling? Like, that's a random thought, but
it can only be God. Like, why would I think that?
Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to work out in my head, how can I do this? Because the only way I could get cash, I'm like, I have my card on me, but there's only one hotel that has an ATM where I can pull out money. And I don't know how to get from the church where I'm going, what tram or public transport to get to that hotel. And my Russian is not great at this point. So I'm thinking, how is this going to work? And I'm like, okay, well, if you're saying to do it, I'm going to do it. So I go back, I give her all the money. Now I'm on this real high, and I'm like, yeah, God, you're in this. So I get to the church, I sit up in the balcony, and doing the worship, sermon starts. I'm like, I need to leave in about 10 minutes if I'm going to get to this hotel. I said, but I don't know where this place is. I'm like, Lord, you're going to have to come through. Precisely at that moment, a guy comes out of nowhere and sits down next to me and says, hey, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm so glad you're here. I need to get out of here. He's like, can you show me what tram? He's like, yeah, come on, we'll go. I got you. And I'm like, yes, God, you come through, So he puts me on the right tram. I go to the tram. Now I'm praising him for the day. I'm thinking, Lord, it's so great that you come through. I get to this hotel. I walk through the doors, these big double doors. They open up. And there, lying on the floor, spread-eagled, is this guy with a blue face. His face is completely blue. He is not breathing. There's his girlfriend or wife is panicking, freaking crying out. The lobby's sort of bustling about. The doorman is leaned over this guy, and I come and I'm like, what is going on? This guy looks dead. I'm like, what is going on? I come and I look at the doorman. I kneel down at the guy's head, and I put my hand on his head, and the doorman looks at me and he starts to say something. I didn't know exactly what he said, but I could make out CPR in it. And he's like, do you want to do CPR? It was something to that effect. And I'm like, I'm going to pray for this guy.
Wow.
So I put my hand on his head. The doorman starts doing CPR. And I was so confident right from the get-go, this guy's going to be fine. He's going to start breathing. He's going to come back to life. But there was absolutely no sign of that. After about 5 minutes, no sign. The doorman starts doing CPR. Then,
which they say after 3 minutes, your brain's dead. And
I don't know the science behind it, but I do know that at some point the doorman pulled out this spoon and shoves a spoon down the man's throat and sort of wriggled it about, made the most horrible sound, like it was like, okay, not good. And so after about 10 minutes, still nothing.
Wow.
Now at this point, I'm like, Lord, I really felt this guy's going to be just fine. Like, what's going on?
Wow.
And I reached out and touched his head and just started praying out loud in tongues.
Wow.
And after 15 minutes, still nothing.
Man, you were still there 15 minutes later?
Oh yeah,
wow.
we were just camped out there. The guy's not breathing. It's like, okay. And the other guy was still doing CPR, which probably helped my faith. Like if he's going to be trying to do that, then I should be trying to do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's doing the natural, you do the spiritual.
Yeah, exactly. He's trying, I'm trying. So I'm praying in tongues, and I'm rebuking death and speaking life into this guy and all the rest of it. My hand's on his head, and I'm thinking, I'm touching a dead person, but I'm still going for it, And then all of a sudden, after about 15 minutes, I hear this.
Wow.
It's like, what's that? Like, like the doorman and I are both like, what is going on? And it was him taking a really sort of weird, shallow sort of breath.
Yeah.
And it just it was like his airway just opened up or whatever. And he just all of a sudden started breathing. Then he opens his eyes and starts to sit up. He starts to sit up. And you can tell on his face, he's probably thinking, why do I have the most sore throat in the world? That guy jammed a spoon down your throat. But he sits up and he's like, looking around. And precisely at that point, the ambulance arrives.
Wow.
And they pull up right to the steps, come up with a stretcher, cart the guy away. And I'm like, Lord, you just set that guy free. And I don't know, whether he was dead or whether I think he was dead, but I don't know whether he was just dead or the Lord used, but I know that the Lord used my prayers. I know it was a supernatural occurrence that I was there at that precise time.
And if you hadn't given the money to the beggar,
if I hadn't given that money, I wouldn't have been there.
Yeah. And that's it. God puts you in the right place at the right time with the right people. And it always starts with obedience, doesn't it?
Yeah. I would have never known that I could be there at that precise moment, but it started with that thing of obedience. So
wow, but I know you, and I know that that's something that you've carried through your whole Christian walk. Even you were telling me about the way God provided for your schooling, and that just the same thing, isn't it? Just obedience, just when tell us about what happened.
Yeah. I mean, let me say this first though, that there's been so many times. I mean, just hearing that, there's a little bit of guilt that goes within me because there's been so many times where I haven't.
Well, you haven't, yeah.
And I'm like, just so many times where I wish that I would have followed through with that, and I'm just so grateful that God is so gracious, and He just keeps putting circumstances in front of me, and setting me up for success. And every failure is just on the pathway to another thing that I'm able to obey in. And then He empowers me and covers up those weaknesses, because there's been so many times where I just have kicked myself for not following through. So
it's a bit like the heavenly game show. When you die, it's like Jesus will be like, here's what you could have won, you said no to this. But
his redemptive power and His ability to even take those mistakes and those weaknesses and redeem them is just phenomenal. So with university, because there's one of each of those stories, a good decision and a bad decision there. Because when I was in Ukraine, the second time, I felt after the School of Biblical Studies is 3 trimesters. And after the first one, I started to feel that I was supposed to leave and go back.
Right.
And so there was this
back to the States.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure where I was supposed to be going yet. And we had a break, and I was going to be praying over it. And actually, over this time, I needed to renew my visa. So my friend said, hey, why don't you come to Western Ukraine and stay in this cabin? I said, oh, man, I'm really using this weekend to pray about what I should be doing, whether I should be coming or going. He said, you should come here, and you can pray, and it'll be great. There's a train. It leaves at like 1 o'clock. Come. And come, it'll be fantastic. I think it was in Lvov, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll let you know. So we get off the phone, and right away I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go there and pray. It'll be good. So I show up at the train station like 20 to 1, and they say, oh, there is a train that goes there, but it leaves in 10 minutes. And I was like, oh no, okay. So I buy my ticket. I still hadn't spoken to my friend. It was before mobile phones that day. So I run to the platform. There's a phone on the platform. I call the number that I have for him, and it turns out it's a wrong number.
Oh no.
And it took a while on the phone as I'm saying, I want to speak to Oleg in Russian, and they're saying, Oleg who? And I'm like, Oleg Dupe, and they're like, he's not here. And I'm like trying to explain to them that I'm coming and I'm going to be on the train. And after a good long while, it's like, no, I don't know any Oleg. You've got the completely wrong number. It's like, oh no, now the train doors are about to shut. And I'm like, do I go or do I not? And I ended up getting on the train. Little did I know it was an overnight train. I rationalized that I would just go to Budapest and renew my visa, which I needed to do sometime anyway. Mm-hmm. But by the time I got to Budapest, I had spent almost all my money. When I looked at how much the visa was going to cost and how much I had in my account, I had $7 a day and they said, we can't see you for another 5 days. And once you leave, you can't get back in without renewing your visa.
Oh, no.
So I had $7 a day. No, I had $5 a day. And the cheapest youth hostel was going to be $7.
Oh, no.
So I knew no one and had no money or anything. I could either eat and not have a place, or have a place for a few days and not eat.
Oh,
yeah, so
that's a bad choice.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, what do I do? So I ended up looking up churches in the phone book. I went to a hostel, called up this church. They connected me with the YWAM base in Budapest, where there was a bunch of crazy young people from a missions college in the States called Bethany Christian University. Bethany. It's a university called Bethany. They also have a publishing house. And I knew that's where I was supposed to go.
Wow.
And so I went back, and I had the way that the Lord cared for me and spoke to me over that weekend was just like, out of this foolish act of me sort of throwing myself out there, I ended up getting my next step. So it was so sort of miraculous and powerful the way that God spoke to me. And I went back and told them I need to go. And they said, oh, are you sure? Are you really sure? I said, I'm pretty sure. So they said, well, why don't you try to raise money for the next 2 trimesters, and if you raise it, then you can take that as a sign that you're supposed to be here, because we feel you're supposed to be here. And if you don't raise it, then you can take that as confirmation that you're supposed to go.
Yeah, like a fleece.
Yeah. And that sounded fine. So I tried to raise the money, and not a single person gave. And even though it was like, oh, it's great that you confirmed that, but I also felt devastated.
Yeah.
I also felt like, oh man, I don't have any support now. So I ended up leaving Ukraine. I had to borrow money from my brother, going and staying with him, and in Florida. I was working for a little while to try to pay him off. And the time came to go to university, and I thought, Lord, I'm not asking anybody for anything, because that was just too painful.
After getting nothing.
After getting all that rejection.
Investing in you.
Yeah. I thought, I'm not asking. I was like, if you want me to go, you're going to have to provide. I thought, what I will do is I will go tell this church that I'm going to, that I feel like this is what I'm called to, and see if they want to support me as a church without asking outright. I was going to be pretty under the radar about it. So I go to see their missions pastor, who agrees to meet with it, and he says, when the Lord speaks, he usually confirms. He speaks through the word, through his people, but he also speaks through circumstances. And if your circumstances don't line up, i.e. he's not giving you the money to do this, then it's probably not his will. Right.
Okay.
And as soon as he said that, I'm sitting there thinking, no, this is wrong. Like, I knew the story. I knew that God he had called me to do this.
Yeah.
So I left there thinking, okay, God, I don't know how you're going to do it. But I packed up on my car. I drove from Florida to Minnesota. And
so you drove to the university.
To the university,
even though you hadn't got the money to even get
they
in.
allowed me to enroll by faith.
Wow.
And you had to pay for the full 4 years over the course of the first year.
Wow.
So there were 3 payments, and you had to make each payment. And the date for the first payment came up. I didn't know how I was going to pay it. I'm expecting a conversation with them saying, and I didn't know how I was going to respond. But instead, the administrator came, put a paper on my desk. I opened it up, and it said paid. There was the receipt for my first installation of my fees paid by an anonymous person. And I thought, wow.
Well, you can go tell your missions pastor,
I know. I did think about that.
Yeah.
And
if you're watching, shame on you.
No. And then subsequently, every single time a payment was due, that payment was paid. And I still to this day do not know who paid for that. But yeah, God came through massively. And it's just a lesson. It's a lesson that I think I probably need to learn now. It's just that he's able to cover whatever it is our need is.
Yeah. And thank God for that person who obeyed the Lord in paying for it. It's nice to be on both sides of that story, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be receiving, but also to honor God when He tells you, just like giving a homeless man all your all your money,
Yeah. So good. Yeah.
Man, that is good. And God has looked after you, and obviously now you're married, 6 kids, and let's bring it into more recently. You shared with me an incredible vision you had.
Yeah.
And just how it's spurring you to actually even study that and just lean into that with all of your life, really. You're really coming into this revelation. Do you want to just go into that?
Yeah, it was... COVID was hard for a lot of people. And for us, it was really... That was a season where something that was on our heart, we wanted to plant a church. So we had been pastoring a church in Orkney for 9 years. That church had been doing really, really well. We had loved our life there. We loved the people there.
Wow.
And there was a young couple on our leadership team who were the children of the pastors before us. And it felt right to pass the church on to them.
Right.
And to move down south. We had already been doing a lot more stuff in Scotland and in England as well, and just wanted to plant a church here with a heart to seeing the spiritual temperature in the nation raised.
Yeah,
that we would connect with other churches. We had this conviction that somehow we were going to have some part to play in encouraging or just seeing really revival come to every part of the church. And so we didn't know what that was going to look like, but we felt that a church plant was going to be strategic in that. So there was a group of people that it was agreed we were going to plant a church together, and we had moved down in October 2020 after the lockdown.
Wow.
Little did we know there was going to be 2 or 3 more lockdowns, and we were going to be in a state of lockdown for a while.
Wow.
And so the church plant did not go the way that we expected it. And we made a painful decision to lay that down. And the Lord's opened up all sorts of doors since. But when we were in the middle of wrestling with what really felt like failure at the time, at the same time I was being invited to this young apostolic group at Bethel Church, and it was a real honor to be a part of this group. Some of these guys were experiencing amazing things. They were seeing this one guy. He's awesome. His name is Benji Morph. He started an indigenous movement in Thailand where they baptized. They had 3 they probably had more since, but they had 3 baptisms. I think the first one was like 2,500 people one weekend. Then a quarter later, it was like 3,500. Then a quarter later, it was 5,000.
Was it like 6 days long or something? Like, how did they do that?
I think it was 2 days. There's videos. You can see them busting these people in. and they had lines, like 10 rows of people just coming into the river and people baptizing them one after the other and coming out of the water just transformed. I mean, like, but like, you know, so testimony time.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, geez, you know, we lost half of our people, you know, and we only had 8. You know, they're like, we baptized 5,000 people, you know, and just, you've heard of imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Well, I had it like times 10,
Yeah.
you know, it was bad. And so I get invited to this apostolic conference, and I'm thinking, like, please just don't let anybody ask me any questions about what I'm doing, you know.
Yeah.
At the same time, they were going to let us speak to the second year BSSM students.
Oh, nice.
And so it was this collision of feeling completely like an imposter, feeling completely like a failure, and yet being given a position of honor.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh gosh, wrestling with the weight of this. And I'm at Bethel Church, which, if you don't know, is an absolute massive church. And I'm seated in the second row, right behind Chris Valentin, who's one of my heroes. And you know that they sort of ushered us into this seat, and I'm worshiping, and all of a sudden I have this vision.
Wow.
And I'm in the throne room of God. And there in the throne room of God is the throne in this bright light that is more brilliant than you can't even see into. It's just this piercing light. And flooding from this bright light is this like rainbow stream of light washing over the head of the elders. And the elders are there on their faces.
Wow.
And this rainbow is like a fire hose of light washing over them. And somehow I know that each color in this rainbow represents a different attribute of God. So the mercy of God, the joy of God, the wrath of God, the peace of God, the love of God, you know, the compassion and the tenderness of God. All of these things in like turned up to infinity.
Yeah.
And any one of those things, you know, the fullness of the emotions that they're experiencing going through this, but they're experiencing them all at the same time. And it was like the look of intense pain, pleasure, everything on their faces. There was just tears streaming down their eyes.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow, you know, they're experiencing a depth of God. And all of a sudden I'm aware of myself standing next to someone who's like Jesus.
Wow.
And he says to me, look at their crowns. And I look over, and there are their crowns laying on the ground, and they're completely inconsequential. You know, the only thing that matters is what they're experiencing, and they're experiencing His holiness, and they're going, holy are you. You know, they're experiencing His glory. They're like, all glory is yours. Everything coming out of their mouth is about what they're experiencing, and their crowns mean literally nothing.
Yeah, they've laid them down.
I'm thinking they didn't even lay them down. They just fell down, and there they are.
They didn't care.
Yeah, it's like, the only thing that mattered is receiving at that moment.
Yeah.
Because the true treasure of heaven was Him Himself. And I'm like, and then God's this Jesus standing next to me says, if you think, because I was aware I had the crown on my head, my crown was on my head, and He said, if you think you need that in order to stand in my presence, then you'll never take it off. Right? If you think you have to wear that crown in order to come into this room and be with me, you'll never take it off, because you want to be with me. You want to be in my presence.
Yeah.
And if you think, oh, if I don't have this crown on, I'll not be able to be near Him. I need to remind Him that I'm royalty so that I have access into His presence. But if I believe that, which is a lie, I'll never be able to assume the position that the elders had assumed, which is the one of receiving the true treasure of heaven. Right? And it was like, He started speaking to me. I want to see you set free from the addictions of the approval of man, needing to get approved by other people and have them validate who you are, or being approved by the works that you do, and thinking that, you know, because I've achieved this or I've achieved that, that's what enables me to stand in your presence. And He started unpacking this thing of, you know, there's all sorts of crowns that we put on our head that we think makes God love us more.
Like it qualifies us for his
It
love.
qualifies us to receive. And that
Wow.
and that actually prevents us from being in that position to receive. And then then he started speaking to me. He says, the thing is, John, you want to please me. You really want to please me. And so you often think that what pleases me is that crown on your head.
Wow. Okay.
The works that you do, you know, and the different things that you can point at and say, look at what I've achieved. But actually, my pleasure is constant over you. And he started speaking to me about when Jesus was baptized and Jesus comes out of the water. Remember what the Father says, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased.
That's right. Wow.
And he's saying, this is what you were baptized into. When you were baptized, and it's not even my physical baptism in water so much as when Christ actually died, there was a baptism into death.
That's
that
right.
I was in him, and I was actually in him as he was baptized. And as he was raised up out of the water, which is symbolic of him being raised out of the tomb, I was in him at that moment. And when that voice echoed from heaven saying, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased, that voice was echoing over me at that time, saying, this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. And he was saying, that cannot be improved upon.
No. And it's full circle from your encounter with the demon who called you his son and said, this is I'll give you my inheritance. And that's the lie, that's the deception, but the absolute truth you were looking for.
That's exactly
was
right.
Jesus.
It's exactly
this
right.
This is my Son.
It's full circle.
Yeah.
Only there was the condition of the enemy was that I did such and such and such and such. And the condition of God was, hey, I've already done this for you.
Yeah.
Do you want to believe it?
That's so good. That brings us into such a good place to land. I love that. Just, you know, for anyone who's looking for that, you only get it in Jesus. You only get that confidence of knowing your love, knowing you have a Father in heaven. And like you say, even as Christians, we can get religious. We try and put these crowns on, these things that qualify us, whether it's our works or our position or, I don't know, a title in church or whatever it is. But I love that. And even the fact that in Revelation, when we read that about the elders laying down their crowns, it was a vision that John had. And you're John, and you had a vision of the same thing. I love that, you know, just the parallels, you know. God's he's always got stuff in patterns, hasn't he, in rhythms. But John, why don't you pray for us to close off for anyone listening or watching, and whatever you feel led to pray.
Yeah, Father, I want to thank you that you are pleased with us. And I know that sometimes that seems so hard to believe. When I look at my life and the mistakes that I've made and the things that I know that I didn't follow through on or didn't obey. And I know every person who's hearing this will have things in their life where they feel like, how could you be pleased with me? But I want to thank you for the magnitude of your grace in Christ. And I want to thank you, Lord, for the way that you delight in your kids despite our weakness. And I thank you that you love to take the weak in order to shame the strong. You glorify your name through the weak. Amen. And so I want to pray, Lord, for any person listening to this, that they would have a fresh encounter with the God who says, this is my child in whom I am well pleased. And I pray that that would just be resonating over their lives, over their decisions, that things would break off each person, lies would break off of them that just say, hey, you're never going to be good enough. And that might be true in one sense, but I know that your love, that all things are made perfect by your love. So we thank you for that. Lord, bring faith, grace, and strength in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, John. That was a great podcast, and I'm sure we'll get you back on sometime soon.
Yeah.
Amen.
All right.